Clint Eastwood, a name that resonates across generations. He's been in the industry for decades, known for his roles in classic films like The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly, and Gran Torino. His reputation as a tough, no-nonsense actor is matched only by his skills behind the camera. But beyond the films, Clint Eastwood has lived a life full of wisdom, shaped by years of experience in Hollywood and beyond. One day, in a quiet moment at a public event, something unexpected happened. A fan, standing among the crowd, mustered the courage to approach Clint. It wasn't for an autograph or a selfie. No, this fan had something much deeper in mind. They had been struggling with life, feeling lost and unsure of their next steps. So they turned to Clint Eastwood, someone they admired not just for his on-screen presence, but for the life he had led. "Mr. Eastwood, can I ask you for some advice?" the fan asked nervously. Clint looked at them, his face serious but kind. In that simple question, an unforgettable conversation was about to begin. What followed would change the fan's perspective on life forever. The fans stood there, feeling a mix of emotions. They were in their late 20s, but life felt like it was slipping through their fingers. It seemed like everyone around them had figured things out, their friends, family, even strangers on social media. But for the fan, the path forward felt unclear. They'd bounced between jobs, failed relationships, and dreams that never quite came to fruition. The fan had tried to follow the usual advice: work hard, stay positive, push through. But none of it seemed to work. They felt like they were stuck in a cycle, constantly questioning what went wrong. Every day felt the same, and the fear of being stuck forever grew stronger. They began to wonder if they would ever find a way out of the confusion and frustration. It wasn't just about career or relationships, it was about life itself. The fan felt overwhelmed by the idea of the future. Where was it all headed? Was there something they were missing, some key piece of advice that could make everything fall into place? The weight of these questions was becoming too much to carry alone. Then, they thought of Clint Eastwood. They admired him, not just as an actor, but as someone who had lived a life full of challenges and triumphs. Clint was someone who had faced his own struggles and come out stronger on the other side. If there was anyone who might have the answers, it was him. So, despite their nerves, the fan decided to ask the one question that had been haunting them. "Mr. Eastwood, can I ask you for some advice?" Clint Eastwood looked at the fan with a steady, unflinching gaze. There was no rush in his response. He didn't offer a quick fix or a fancy quote. Instead, he took a moment to consider the question, as if weighing the weight of the fan's struggle against his own life's lessons. When he spoke, his voice was calm and direct, yet there was a warmth in it that made the fan feel heard. "You know," Clint began, "life isn't always going to go the way you want. You can plan all you want, but things don't always follow that plan." He paused, giving the fan a moment to absorb the words. "The key is to keep moving forward, no matter what." The fan listened closely, trying to process his words. Clint continued, his tone still measured but firm. "You've got to take responsibility for your own life. Nobody's coming to rescue you. You're the one who decides where you go, even when things get tough." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that struck deep. "Discipline's important," Clint said, emphasizing the word as though it were a life motto. "It's not always about working hard, but working smart. You've got to set your mind on something and stick with it, no matter how many times you fail or get knocked down. If you've got that, you can handle anything life throws your way." The fan stood there, taken aback by Clint's straightforward advice. There was no sugarcoating, no attempt to make things sound easier than they were. Clint spoke from experience, from years of both success and failure. "You'll face challenges," Clint added, his voice softer now. "But don't get bogged down by them. Use them. Let them push you forward." His eyes locked with the fans, as though he was speaking directly to their soul. "Just don't stop moving. That's how you win." The fan felt something shift inside them. Clint's words weren't just advice. They were a lifeline. For the first time in a long while, the fan felt a sense of clarity, as though they had been given permission to keep going, no matter how difficult it might get. The fan stood there in silence, trying to process what Clint had just said. It felt like a punch to the gut. But in the best way possible. Clint's words weren't just motivational. They were raw, real, and full of life's hard truths. For a moment, everything else around them faded away. It was as though the world had slowed down, and only Clint's voice mattered. A mixture of emotions flooded through the fan. They felt a sense of relief, as though a heavy weight had been lifted. For the first time in what felt like forever, they weren't alone in their struggles. Clint Eastwood, a man who had lived through his own challenges, had just shown them that it was okay to stumble. What mattered was getting back up and continuing the journey. At the same time, the fan felt a little uncomfortable. Clint's advice wasn't about excuses or shortcuts. There was no room for self-pity, no easy way out. It was a call to action, a challenge to take responsibility and make the most out of their own life. But as the discomfort wore off, a quiet determination began to take its place. The fan realized Clint was right. Life wasn't going to hand them anything. They had to fight for it. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting for things to change and start changing things themselves. Keep moving forward. The fan repeated Clint's words quietly to themselves. It was a simple phrase, but it echoed in their mind like a mantra. They could feel a shift inside them, a spark of hope, a renewed sense of purpose. It was like someone had turned a light on in the darkness. For the first time in a long while, the fan believed they could face whatever was coming next. Clint took a deep breath, as if he knew the fan needed something more. His eyes softened, but his voice remained firm, each word carrying the weight of a lifetime of experiences. "Listen, kid," Clint started, his tone a little more serious now. "You're gonna fail. And that's okay. We all do." He looked the fan straight in the eyes. "What matters is how you get up after that failure." The fan's heart skipped a beat. Failure. The fan had been terrified of it for so long, avoiding risks out of fear of making mistakes. But Clint's words weren't just about failing, they were about something deeper: resilience. "You see, failure is part of the process," Clint continued. "It's how you learn, how you grow. You don't just bounce back from it, you use it. You take what you learned from the failure, and you make it your strength. That's how you become better." His voice was steady, each word punctuating the importance of perseverance. Clint paused, his face serious but not unkind. If you let failure define you, then you've lost. But if you keep moving, if you get back up every time life knocks you down, that's where the real strength lies. The fan absorbed every word. There was something about the way Clint spoke, something about the raw truth in his voice, that made them believe it. It wasn't about being perfect or never stumbling. It was about what came after the stumble. "Don't be afraid of change either," Clint added, his gaze shifting slightly. "Life's always changing, and you can either sit back and let it pass you by, or you can change with it. Embrace it. Grow with it." Clint leaned in a little, the weight of his words lingering in the air. "But the key is persistence. It's about sticking with what you believe in, no matter what. That's what gets you through the tough times. That's what makes you who you are." The fan felt the gravity of Clint's advice settling in their chest. It wasn't just words anymore. It was a philosophy, a way of living. And they knew it would stick with them for the rest of their life. The fan left the conversation with Clint feeling different, lighter, almost as if a burden had been lifted. The words Clint had shared stayed with them long after the encounter ended. For the first time in ages, the fan felt a flicker of hope. They weren't sure how it would happen, but they knew something had to change. In the days that followed, the fan started small. They woke up a little earlier each day, not because they had to, but because they realized they wanted to. Clint's advice about taking responsibility for their life echoed in their mind every time they faced a decision. They weren't waiting for life to hand them opportunities anymore. They were creating them. It wasn't easy. The fan had moments of doubt, moments when they questioned if they were really capable of making the changes Clint spoke about. But instead of turning away from the challenge, they pushed forward, one step at a time. They began to tackle the things they'd been avoiding, the small goals they had put off for months, sometimes years. They took that first difficult step toward changing careers, even though it was terrifying. There were setbacks, of course. Things didn't always go according to plan. But with Clint's words in their mind, the fan didn't allow those setbacks to define them. They learned to embrace them. The fan also started to approach relationships differently. They stopped letting fear hold them back from being open and honest with the people in their life. The fear of rejection, of failure, began to lose its power over them. Instead of shying away from hard conversations, they faced them head-on. And slowly but surely, things began to shift. The fan found themselves more confident, more willing to take risks, and more accepting of the inevitable failures that came along the way. They didn't let those failures stop them, they used them to push forward, just like Clint had said. Though the journey was far from over, the fan knew they were on the right path. Clint's advice had given them a new lens through which to see the world, and it was changing their life in ways they hadn't imagined. As time passed, the fan began to notice something remarkable. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was different. The weight of uncertainty that had once held them back started to lift. With each passing day, they felt more in control, more aligned with their own goals. The doubts and fears they once clung to began to fade, replaced by a quiet, growing confidence. The impact of Clint's words went deeper than just motivation. It had instilled a shift in perspective that resonated in every area of their life. The fan now saw challenges not as roadblocks, but as opportunities for growth. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by failures, they embraced them as a natural part of the process. They started to understand what Clint had meant when he said, "Failure is how you learn, how you grow." Every setback was no longer something to fear, but something to learn from and use to get better. One of the most profound changes came in how the fan viewed their future. The uncertainty that once felt paralyzing now felt like an open road, full of possibilities. They realized that they didn't have to have all the answers. They didn't need to know exactly how things would turn out. What mattered was their willingness to keep moving, to keep trying, no matter the outcome. In Clint's words about persistence, those were the ones that stuck with the fan the most. Life wasn't easy, and it wasn't fair, but they could face it with resilience. They learned that nothing worth having came easily, but it was always worth fighting for. Persistence became their mantra, their silent promise to themselves. The fan found that, as they pushed forward, they began to influence those around them. Friends and family noticed the change. They saw someone who was no longer waiting for life to happen, but who was actively creating the life they wanted. It wasn't just about achieving success, it was about the strength to keep going when things got tough, to rise after every fall. Looking back, the fan realized that the moment they met Clint Eastwood had been a turning point. In that brief encounter, they received not just advice, but a new approach to life. Clint's wisdom had been simple, yet powerful. Keep moving, learn from failure, embrace change, and never stop trying. These weren't just words, they were principles that had shaped his own life, and they were now shaping the fans. As the fan continued their journey, they couldn't help but feel grateful for that moment. What had seemed like a chance encounter had turned into a life-changing experience. And every time life tested them, they could hear Clint's voice in their mind, urging them to keep going. With that guidance, they knew they were prepared for whatever came next.